Our next presentation is by Kris Oswalt, Kris Dickey, John Kapp, and Heidi Isgari. Kris?
Thank you. I'm Kris Oswalt. I'm serving as the president of CSF, and it's a great pleasure to have with me this morning 3 other colleagues that are working closely with us on one of our large projects in CSF, the DevInfo project, which I'll explain as we look at it this morning. We have Kris Dickey from our New York office. It's his first time to be with us here. He's the Director of Research and Innovations. He joins us with great enthusiasm. We have our first year to be operating in an office in New York, and it's been very helpful to have a team there, and we're very grateful for Kris's contribution and for his time to be with us today. So he'll be presenting after I give you a brief overview of the new direction of DevInfo that we've taken this year. Heidi is here in our Ann Arbor office, and she'll give us some background on some of the things she's been working on, and we're very happy with the missions that she has been able to conduct so well. And we're very excited about having someone to warm up the Ann Arbor office along with Sandy and others. Hopefully we can add a few more in the future. And then we have John Kapp here with us, who's in a way a native of this area, not too far from here. And John was formerly the director of the DevInfo support group and has this year moved on to reconnect with being a teacher. So he's gone back to get his teaching credentials and is working in Bangkok, where he lives with his wife and young child. So the 4 of us will present over the next few minutes some of the exciting things that are happening in DevInfo. And I've decided to break from historic presentations that I made here and not do a PowerPoint. No. This morning I'm going to talk about a few things, show you a few things on a few sites that I'm quite excited about. But I thought that maybe I would not do that 110 slide PowerPoint that I often do. I remember former President Clinton talking a few weeks ago, saying that in the development field, where he's very much involved with his foundation, that there's a lot of naysayers about how the world is deteriorating, and there's a lot of difficult things happening. And we're very much aware of that, especially in this very interactive world in which we live, and we hear news bursting out of the corners of the world, like today in the Middle East, problems that are imminent, and we worry about those, and they become bigger than life in a sense. And we spend a lot of our time thinking about those issues. And when I think about CSF and CSF's mission to try to use technology to improve development, I was interested in the President's comments about what positive things are happening that we don't hear about in the news, that don't get that headline, and then therefore don't get somehow registered in our minds. And I'm really excited about some of the things that are happening where CSF has been able to make some contribution. And I want to dwell on those today. So I think that optimism helps other people to become more optimistic, and by doing that we can be more successful in reaching our mission. There will always be problems, but there will always be opportunities. And it's how do you face that when you're looking at the challenges that we look at every day, as an individual or as a group. Well, one of the things that happens in development of any large program, like our DevInfo project, which is now in about 120 countries, is that as you develop the system and get more people involved, you will find that in any sort of technology that you're working with, it's going to be somewhat successful, and there'll be some problems that you'll be faced with. There'll be always you'll have to have technical support for people who need some information, or having problems with what you thought would be so easy to do. Or there would be maybe just complete ignorance about something, and people just want to find out what's happening. So we're faced with this in a big way in DevInfo. DevInfo, for those of you who are new to our group today, started as a process to help bring together credible data on development in a way that it can be used for policy and monitoring. And our first attempt was with the World Summit for Children, looking at the 100 or so indicators that monitor children's welfare. And this was started with UNICEF. And we looked at that over some time, and it was in November 7th, 2002, that the executive director of UNICEF offered to Kofi Annan, who at that point was the Secretary General of the UN, to enhance the system to look at beyond the children's goals, those goals which were broader for all development. And at that time, the leaders of the world had decided that they would look at Millennium Development Goals, and those goals were defined with 48 indicators that every country would be responsible for monitoring. And DevInfo became one of the UN-supported projects to help monitor those goals. Now, when you actually look at the 48 indicators, they would say something like net enrollment rate, urban, rural, male, female, and some other things. So the number of indicators grow to about 150 indicators that every country is reporting on. Now, when you go to a country setting to monitor those goals, often a country would be interested in a certain part of them more than another. So there's a country setting that needs to be looked at in every time you're developing a database to monitor. Even though there is a national system, then the international system is trying to guide it, there are differences. For example, in looking at health, in some countries, malaria is a big problem. In other countries, it's not a big problem. So the malaria indicators, like distribution of bed nets and other things, would be very important maybe in some African country, not so important, let's say, in Eastern European country where malaria is not prevalent. So the number of indicators and how they're collected and how frequently they're reported changes a lot. So you can't have a uniform database across all countries and hope at the UN somewhere then that everyone can happily report everything. You need to work with each ministry that's working on the data and look at how they would use it. So DevInfo then was made so that a government could own it. It's open source software. You can provide the software to the country. The country can change the name, and they can use it with any data they want, but they're encouraged to try to use this MBG framework as a reference for at least one of the ways that they're using the data. And this has now become a process of trying to support countries in understanding how to bring their data together in a common place so that donors can use it, that ministries can use it, that civil society can use it. And often when you're doing that, another problem that you're faced with is that the data that you receive are often done through a household survey where the mother or the father are trying to remember something that happened in the past. And by the time the data become available through the survey, it's already looking at the past, quite far into the past, maybe a couple years. And yet you as a minister of health or you as a planning minister need to decide what to do today for the next 5 years. And because let's say you had one number for how many children are dying under the age of 5 in the US, only one number. What could you do with that? You'd say, no, I need state level data. I need county level data. I need to know where it's happening. So often the data are not adequate because we don't have enough funding to go in to be able to see the hotspots. So there are programs now looking at trying to look at subnational information and make that subnational information as credible and as useful as the national level estimates that are often given. And what can you do with a national estimate except compare Mexico with US, with Canada, and then what do you do with it? There's not much you can do with it. It's much more interesting to look at what's happening within a country over time. So DevInfo's basis for usefulness has been to allow subnational data to be put into the system, along with the national estimates, to provide the ownership of the system to the government, to the owners of the data, so that they become confident that what they're doing and what they're providing as the National Statistics Office or as the Ministry of Health or Ministry of Education, they own it, and then you can feel more likely to be confident that what they're doing, because they own it, is reliable in your own decision making. The third thing that we've done is we've said that for any indicator at all, you could have multiple sources that are credible. There's no official number that somehow overrides all the other ones. Because when you get into that kind of debate, you may have someone doing a survey, someone using administrative data, someone doing a different kind of survey, and they never agree. The numbers are slightly different. And there may be good reasons why. And you as a user need to be informed why. But you can never reach the end of that discussion about saying this one is the official data. Because over time, those things keep changing. So DevInfo allows to see a demographic and health survey outcome, a DHS outcome. Then it also allows to see a national survey that was done maybe at the same time or slightly different timing with the same indicators. And then you can use, you can see the list of sources and make a choice. And that's an important aspect of the system. Because of the nature of the project being supported through a software framework, we've had a responsibility to develop and then maintain software over time. So part of this project has been software. But more of the project, about 25% of the funding is used in software. Maybe a little less now, 20%. The rest of the work is on supporting governments in use of data for decision making. So that may be getting the data out of the files that are all there, not very accessible, into a more accessible format. It's also getting the people who would like to use the data to understand that they have access to it. So a lot of the training that we're doing is on capacity building and use of data, and helping people understand that it's very important to become involved in that process. We are very thrilled to have just released version 7 of DevInfo. It's about every 2 years we come out with a new version. This was released on the 18th of October in New Delhi at an international meeting you'll find out more about when you find out about DevInfo, when Kris is going to talk to you. But as we've moved forward, we've taken on a challenge which I think is a very interesting problem for us. All of us sitting here today are so well connected to the internet that we live off of it. You check your email, you check your SMS, you're always somehow linked to that good resource. And so version 7 of DevInfo is really focusing on those types of people who have access to the internet. When we did version 5, we did it all based on desktops, because most of our users remain fragmentally connected or not so well connected to the internet. Version 6 we did have an internet version, but not as fast as it could be, and our main stakeholders say to get to the millions of users that we would like to have, we need to have a very fast internet version. So that's what version 7 is about. And after developing the web version, now we're going back to see how to implement version 7 on desktops. So many of our users who we think would be, it'd be very easy to use internet. It doesn't always happen that they have access. In New York City, when we're doing training, in the UN, you try to connect to the internet, it doesn't work. Because there's certain firewalls, there's certain things happening you can't set up. In New Delhi, where everyone has access, it's one of the best internet connections in the world. At the meeting, supported by a huge funding organization to set up the meeting, email didn't work, internet didn't work. Had to use a different methodology. So you can imagine if you're sitting in the National Statistics Office in a small country, will internet work? No, it won't. So we still have to really think about the fact that we're moving as a society, we're moving very rapidly into the information age that we depend on it so much for our own daily communications. But there is a huge divide, and that gap is narrowing rapidly, but it will remain, even in the places where we think that internet will be prevalent. And so it's, you know, so when you're looking at DevInfo 7, you have to keep that in mind. We're first looking at how to move forward with an internet-based approach, and DevInfo 6.1 remains the desktop version, and we will have a 7 desktop version in the next year. And we hope that by doing it this way, we will remain relevant in those areas where the technology hasn't caught up. So if I go back now to look at some of the things that the challenges that we're faced with, one of the questions that we often get is, how do you know that DevInfo is being used? And how do you know that the data made a difference? How do you measure that? Because that's our goal. We would like to have someone make a better decision because better data access was there, and that they somehow that came together. So you could do a survey and ask people. That happens. We go through our regular processes of evaluation and training, and we ask that question about, you know, do you have a database that supports the MDGs? Does that database somehow help you monitor better? But then the answers that you get are quite vague. But yes, or kind of, or maybe, for some people. So we started a new approach to it, and I want to show you that approach now as part of a way to try to document what we're doing. So if you go to devinfo.org and you look at news, here you'll see a series of stories that tell what's happening with DevInfo. So let's just look at one of them here. Zimbabwe using DevInfo monitoring to track development priorities. Now, you know the challenges that Zimbabwe is going through. Got kicked out of the Commonwealth because of it. And yet, here, there is a certain amount of energy within the UN's framework in the country to be able to set up a monitoring system. Guyana paving the way for census dissemination in the region of CARICOM, the Caribbean country, where Haiti recently had a mission with Kris. In Mexico, an interactive dashboard released online. Now, there are hundreds of these. These are our news releases that come out every other day. We get another news release. And it's our aim, under these news releases, to at least inform our community what's happening at the announcement level or a launch. I want to show you one of them that's a very important one. A Promise Renewed dashboard was launched. What is this new promise? You click on it, there'll be a story about how technology and know-how are available to scale up child survival commitments. And a few weeks ago, the executive director of UNICEF, his name is Anthony Lake, former US official, and the head of USAID, you may recognize him, I think his name is Mr. Shaw, and then some other dignitaries, met to talk about, with government, how to go back to the idea of using all the technology we have to reduce the number of children that are dying under the age of 5. For the first time in history, this decade, it dropped below 10 million a year. First time in history. And now, it's dropped below 7 million, rapidly declining. And it's seen as one of the best indicators to see that available technology is getting to the mother, getting to the child, getting to the family. And what we were asked to do is to create a dashboard about how it's progressing. So when you look at this dashboard, this is CSF's work. Now, 7 million died last year in 2011, and we have data here for many, many years. And every time this blinks, another child has passed away. And you can see through the darker areas of where the problems are. And we can see why. Pneumonia, diarrhea, malaria, neonatal, and other sorts of causes of death. So we can begin to understand what services are required or where the gaps are. So by clicking on a country like Nigeria, we can see where Nigeria falls within its ranking. So Nigeria is 124 child deaths per 1,000 live births. Okay? That meant that in 2011, about 755,000 children died. And that they are reducing that amount by 3.8% per year, which is a lot. It's hard to do it that fast in a country that has that many challenges. And in this, we can see where the trend, it was 214 back in 1990. Now it's dropped to 124 last year. And by 2015, they hope to be down to 71 if they will meet their goal according to the international standard to reduce child mortality by 2/3 over the 15-year period. So they have quite a steep way to go. They may not make it. If we want to try to understand more about that, we can go to child mortality estimates to see how they estimate where those children are dying and how they're dying. So let's look at the country data and find Nigeria. And these represent all the surveys. Each of these lines represent a survey. This is the Nigeria Demographic and Health Survey of 2003 for that data point. There's an international group that meets regularly to look how to put these data points into a model to then draw that trend line. And around the trend line then, down at 124, which is what we have now, 124.1, there's a minimum and maximum, a confidence interval. And it's the first time that we've had that confidence interval. Before, ministers of health would be given one number from the UN, which might be quite different from, like maybe they would say, this was our last survey, so it must be 139. But because of the way this population moves, and because even though there are too many children dying, the event is quite rare, you need to have a modeling system to be able to come up with some confidence of the trend and to predict that trend. So often what happens is a minister will say, it should be 132. Why is the UN saying it's 139 in that year? So you need to have a way of showing how the model is done. So you go back and you say, okay, here's all the data that you've collected in Nigeria. Here are the actual data points that you've used. This is how we've done the estimates through the model. And that is then what gives you this graph. We were doing training in this recently in Thailand. and the cabinet ministers were having a meeting at the same time about child mortality. And our Thai colleagues from the Ministry of Health were so excited about seeing this because it helped them understand and to present their case of why the numbers kept changing and what they were actually meaning. They took the system, did it in Thai overnight, went to the cabinet, and made a presentation just 2 days after learning about the system, and it made the case clearer. And you'll see, now, Nigeria is one of the most difficult ones. Let's look at another country like India, very rich in data. You'll see more of a consistent line over time, and it's shrinking. But India and Nigeria still represent places where more children are dying than anywhere else because of the big population. And let me show you another one where data are more difficult to collect, and there have been some issues there. If I show you Rwanda, look at the line in Rwanda. Why do you think that? Do you remember the genocide?
War.
And the war.
Change dictators.
So this line explains a lot about the society, and it's an important one in terms of donors looking at where funding's going. Let's go back to another series of articles called DevInfo in Action. Now these are stories that are more than just a news release. This is where something's actually happening in the field, evidence of use of data. And so we can see here the first one, which had just happened here the 8th of November 2012, an unprecedented opportunity to legitimize our work. The UN Women group in Burundi using DI monitoring, which lets them set up a framework to see the change of data over time. And if you click on any one of these, and you get to see the story and understand the actors involved, and you get a link to the person who's responsible. And you can see our trainer. This is Mr. Gary Goldman from our office in New York. And this was one of his first missions. He's come in as first as an intern, one of our interns. He's French. And it was his first time to be to this part of the world. And you can see he's kind of different from the others, maybe. And he came back with both a glowing face and a glowing report. It was a very good mission for everyone involved. Data from Honduras being provided through the Human Development Report was available online for the first time. Transparency International in Bangladesh, keeping track of where funds are being used for what reason. Ghana and the United States. I thought you might like this one. This is the teacher edition, where this student went to work with data, and she's from a university here in the US, and how on the other side she made a friend in Ghana and how they're using the data in research. And DevInfo, and some of the statements about how that's made a difference both in the research on both sides of the ocean. There are many, many more. One I want to talk about, and this will be my last one, is this one. When President Clinton was talking about things that are going well in the world, the first he said is that technology that we have today is helping eradicate disease and help more under 5 survive. So what are we doing in those two areas? The second one we've already covered. The first one is working on eradication of polio. Almost there. We can do it in our lifetime. There are 4 countries where polio is still a big problem. India, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Nigeria. These are the 4 big ones. And there are others. But those are the 4 big ones. And we are working in all 4 with DevInfo. What are we doing? I want to show you this site. Polio Info is the name of the site. Now you see there are other countries affected, but the 4 big ones are the ones I just mentioned. And for the first time in history, last year, India was polio-free, declared polio-free. Now, you have to remain polio-free, I think, for 3 years before you are declared as it's over. But this is the second big disease in our recent history that we have a chance to eradicate. First one was dracunculiasis, that was in 1995 approximately. Guinea worm, the horrible guinea worms that used to come out of different parts of the body. It was mainly ingested through bad water. And in polio, what is the approach to solving the polio problem? Do you know? 2 drops of polio vaccine should be put in the mouth of every child at the same time. If you do it in different times, staggered times, the disease will keep moving through the population around and around. So it's called a pulse. So you have a pulse polio day. Once every month, all the children line up and get 2 drops. So you have to have a huge, huge campaign to find those children. And what is the biggest challenge? It's not the technology. We know how to get the polio vaccine now pretty much to where it needs to be. What's the big challenge? Missing children. Children who do not, for one reason or another, get the 2 drops. And one of the biggest reasons is that in many Islamic societies, they feel that it will cause their child to be sterilized. That this is a Western idea that's coming in. So it's a communications campaign that's required to help people understand that the 2 drops are not harmful to your child. And that's what we've been working on. If you look at, I'll just show you one of the data profiles, because I think this is where our let's look at India. And within India, let's look at a recent round. We have in India ways of looking at each state, and within each state the blocks that are affected. And within those blocks we have district level views where this goes down further and further to show where the children are missing, which households they're missing from. There's a huge community campaign that goes on where the community worker helps monitor each of the households and tries to ask the mother or father why the child didn't come. Were they traveling somewhere else, or was it because the family doesn't want the child to participate, or whatever reason? And then try to work through the community leaders to change their perspective about the project. So at this level, we hope that within our lifetime, one more very difficult disease would be eradicated. And we're making this type of contribution in this project. So with that, I'd like to close my presentation and now invite Dr. Kris to talk about DevInfo 7.